Hey everybody, this is Michael David Angel, and you are watching the My Human and Me YouTube channel. Thank you so much for watching. Please like, subscribe, and share with others, and join my free Patreon.
Usually when we talk about calling an airline to rebook a canceled flight or, calling your bank because there's some weird charge on your card, there's this shared expectation.
Right, a shared expectation of mild frustration.
Exactly. If you're listening to this, you've absolutely been there. You navigate the phone tree, you press 4 for billing, you sit through that awful compressed hold music for 20 minutes.
Yeah, the music is always terrible.
It really is. And then finally, there is this massive wave of relief when an actual human voice picks up the line. And in that moment, you just want your problem solved.
Which makes sense. It's an entirely transactional moment for almost all of us. We are so focused on getting the late fee reversed or getting on that flight that we rarely stop to think about the human being on the other end.
Let alone the massive global ecosystem that put them in that chair.
Exactly. Wearing that headset, working in that specific time zone, it's a highly coordinated machine.
It's invisible infrastructure. Like, we turn on the tap, water comes out, we dial the 1-800 number, a customer service rep answers.
But when you step back and look at the physical mechanics of that infrastructure right now, you realize something profound is shifting.
Yeah, heavily shifting. Suddenly, that really mundane phone call about a credit card charge is standing at the epicenter of what might be the biggest economic earthquake of our generation.
Without a doubt. We're looking at a global landscape today that is, frankly, terrifyingly fragile.
It is. So welcome to the deep dive. Today, we need to look right at that fault line because the sheer scale of what we are unpacking is staggering.
It really is the absolute definition of an economy standing on a tectonic fault. The pressure has been building for years.
But the velocity of the technological shift we're seeing right now, it's totally unprecedented.
The ground is already moving.
So we have a stack of sources on the table today that should honestly be keeping global economists awake at night. And policymakers, really anyone who works at a computer.
Anyone who types on a keyboard for a living needs to be paying attention to this.
Right. And the catalyst for our conversation today is this February 2025 working paper from the International Monetary Fund.
The IMF.
Yeah. And when it came out, it was super technical, buried in all this macroeconomic jargon. Almost nobody outside of Manila really paid attention to it at first.
Which is wild, considering what was actually inside it.
Exactly.
Oh.
Buried in this document was a complete bombshell of a statistic, 89%.
A number that, honestly, completely upends decades of conventional economic development theory.
When you put it in context, yeah.
Yeah.
So 89% of the Philippine business process outsourcing workforce, what they call the BPO sector. That 89% sits at high risk of automation.
And just to put a human face on that percentage before we go any further, because it's so important.
Oh, please do.
That is 1.9 million people. Nearly 2 million workers staring down a technology that didn't even meaningfully exist in the mainstream public consciousness 5 years ago.
Just 5 years ago. It's wild. And to be clear about the magnitude here, we're not talking about like one specific company going through a rough quarter.
No, not at all. We aren't even talking about one outdated job category like elevator operators back in the day.
Right. We are talking about 89% of an entire national workforce in its absolute most vital revenue-generating sector.
So to really understand the mechanics of this, we've pulled together this incredible stack of sources.
Yeah, we aren't just relying on the IMF paper. We are layering that over the World Economic Forum's Future of Jobs Report 2025.
Plus the latest data from the Stanford AI Index.
We've got the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics 10-year projections. And we also brought in these comprehensive economic impact analyses from PwC and the World Bank.
It is a phenomenal collection of data.
Yeah.
And what becomes totally undeniable when you synthesize these reports is the pattern.
You stop seeing isolated incidents of corporate restructuring.
Exactly. You start seeing a unified structural transformation of global labor.
And that pattern leads us to the core mission of our deep dive today. We are answering one massive question. What happens to a country when artificial intelligence takes 89% of its jobs?
But before we start tracing those shockwaves, I think it's absolutely crucial to establish the scope here.
Yeah, set the stage for us.
This is not just a localized story about overseas call centers in Southeast Asia. Assuming this is just an isolated issue for the Philippines is a massive and potentially very dangerous misconception.
It's way bigger than that.
Right. What we are looking at in Manila and Cebu today is a 5-year preview of the global economic future.
A 5-year preview. So if you're listening to this on your commute, sitting in traffic, heading to an office job, the forces reshaping Manila right now are coming for your desk next.
It is a live fire experiment. It shows what happens when routine cognitive labor is no longer exclusively the domain of human beings.
The very labor that built the global middle class over the last 50 years. But to really get the potential collapse, we have to understand the architecture of the industry that's in the crosshairs. Like, how did the Philippines get into this highly exposed position in the first place?
Well, they didn't just stumble into being the call center capital of the world.
Right, it wasn't an accident.
Not at all. It was a highly deliberate, decades-long macroeconomic strategy. Starting in the late 1990s, they systematically transformed themselves into the undisputed global capital of voice and back-office work.
This is the IT BPM industry, right? Information technology and business process management.
Yes. They heavily leveraged their high level of English proficiency, a strong cultural affinity with the United States, and massive government support to attract foreign corporations.
They saw exactly where globalized capitalism was heading. They realized internet fiber optics made geography totally irrelevant for data.
And they completely cornered the market. They dominated it.
By the end of 2025, how big was this industry actually?
It was generating roughly $40 billion in export revenue.
40 billion. Wow.
Yeah. That accounts for over 8% of the country's entire gross domestic product.
Okay, let's just pause on that. 8% of the GDP.
To put that in perspective for economic historians, it's comparable in size to the entirety of overseas remittances. Money sent home by Filipinos working abroad.
Which historically was the absolute bedrock of their economy.
Exactly. The ultimate safety net.
Let's try to visualize that dependency for a second. Think of a country's economy like a massive, sprawling house. You've got different rooms, right?
Right. An agriculture room, a manufacturing room.
A tourism room. But if 8% of your entire house's foundation, the actual concrete it sits on, is suddenly sitting directly over an active fault line.
The entire structure trembles when the ground shifts.
Exactly. You don't just lose one room. The structural integrity of the whole house is compromised.
That is a highly accurate way to look at the macroeconomics here, because that 8% doesn't just exist in a vacuum.
It drives everything else.
Yes, it is the engine driving massive amounts of domestic consumption. Real estate development, for instance.
Like the skylines in Manila and Cebu.
Entire skylines were essentially willed into existence to house this industry. Millions of square feet of prime commercial real estate dedicated just to servers and cubicles.
And then you have the secondary economy, all the stuff that supports those cubicles.
The massive ecosystem of 247 diners, late-night transit, coffee shops, all of it only exists to service the millions of people working the graveyard shift to align with North American business hours.
The human element of that is just staggering to think about.
It really is.
We're talking about 1.9 million individual human beings totally altering their circadian rhythms, sleeping while the sun is up just so they can be cheerful and alert when some guy in Ohio calls about a broken router at 2 p.m.
And remember, over 70% of the clients buying these services are in North America.
So like we said at the start, if you've called a business in the U.S. or Canada in the last decade, there's a very high probability you spoke to someone sitting in a high-rise in Manila.
And we really have to talk about what those wages mean on the ground. It contextualizes the severity of the threat we're discussing.
Because by American standards, the hourly rate for a BPO worker seems, incredibly modest.
Right. To a listener in New York, it might not sound like much. But within the Philippine domestic economy, these wages are entirely transformative.
This is the definition of middle-class mobility in a developing nation. It's not just pocket money for a teenager.
Far from it. These jobs are the primary economic pillars for entire extended families. The BPO salary is how families secure mortgages to buy houses.
It's how parents raise children, how they afford health care.
Very frequently, it's how older siblings put their younger brothers and sisters through university. It creates this incredible cascading effect of generational upward mobility.
A whole generation of college grads basically structured their lives around the promise of this industry.
It was the safe bet. the reliable, guaranteed path out of poverty and into a secure life.
Which brings us crashing violently back into this IMF number, 89% at high risk.
Yeah, the bombshell.
I have to admit, whenever I hear a percentage that high in an economic context, my brain immediately goes to the apocalyptic scenario.
Naturally.
Like, are they saying 1.9 million people are getting fired tomorrow? Because taking that much capital out of the middle class overnight would trigger instant societal collapse.
You'd have mortgage defaults, small business closures, just a complete halt in consumer spending.
Right. So is that what the IMF is predicting tomorrow?
It is the most vital question to ask, and this is where we need to be incredibly precise about the language the IMF uses in their paper.
Okay, lay it out for us.
They are not forecasting that 1.9 million pink slips are being printed today. They are identifying that 89% of those jobs currently sit in what we can call the danger zone.
Walk us through the mechanics of that.
Yeah.
What exactly puts a job in the danger zone?
The danger zone means that the technology currently available on the market possesses the capability to perform the core tasks of that specific job.
So the AI can do it today.
Yes, with acceptable accuracy. Whether or not a specific corporate entity chooses to deploy that AI today, tomorrow, or next year, it transitions from a question of technological capability to a question of corporate timelines.
Just a matter of when they want to cut costs.
Exactly. The technological barrier has been breached, the fortress wall is down, now it's just implementation logistics, software licensing, and, corporate strategy.
So the technology is sitting there, fully baked. The executives know it exists. The sword is hanging over these workers' heads. The thread just hasn't been cut by the accounting department yet.
The thread is fraying rapidly, but the IMF paper is careful to add a layer of nuance here, which requires us to look at the breakdown of that 89%.
The 60-40 split, right?
Right. Roughly 60% of that highly exposed workforce is categorized in the paper as being highly complementary to AR.
Okay, complementary. When you hear that word in a corporate press release, it usually sounds incredibly optimistic.
Oh, it paints a lovely picture.
Right. It paints this picture of the AI acting as an eager digital assistant, just making the worker's life easier.
That is the narrative often presented to the public. It represents the most optimistic interpretation of the data, implying the tech might augment the worker, not replace them.
But there's a but, isn't there?
A huge one. When we apply a rigorous macroeconomic lens and look at historical corporate behavior regarding efficiency gains, the dark side of the word complementary becomes highly problematic.
Because corporations are driven by shareholder value.
Exactly. So making a worker complementary to automation usually means you need far fewer of those workers to achieve the exact same output.
Because the human bottleneck has been removed.
Precisely.
If the human was the slow part,
Yeah.
and the AI speeds them up by a factor of 10, you don't keep all 10 humans to produce 10 times the output.
Because customer demand hasn't increased, you don't suddenly have 10 times as many broken routers to fix.
Right. You just keep one human to meet the existing demand.
You've identified the exact mechanism of displacement. You have one person managing, auditing, and routing the output of 10 AI agents.
Wow.
So yes, that one specific job is saved and perhaps augmented, but the other 9 seats on the call center floor are suddenly empty.
And what about the nature of the work for that one person left?
That's the other issue. Because the AI is now doing the heavy cognitive lifting, formulating the response, retrieving the data, the human's role often gets downgraded to mere quality assurance.
They just become a safety net for the machine.
Essentially, yes. They are just pressing approve on a screen all day.
And when the cognitive skill requirement of a job drops like that, the compensation inevitably drops with it, doesn't it?
It always does. So in reality, complementary often translates to a deeply concerning reality for the labor market. Fewer workers, paid less, generating massively more output for the parent company.
Well, that's a brutal reality check on the tech industry's utopian messaging.
It's the historical reality of automation under capitalism.
Okay, so what about the remaining 40% in the IMF's breakdown? If 60% are facing this complementary downgrade, what happens to the rest?
The pessimistic read of the data is that 40% of the exposed workforce has absolutely no such buffer.
No buffer at all.
None. Their daily tasks are purely substitutable. There is no complementary angle to explore.
Well, the machine just does it.
It executes the job better, faster, with a 0 error rate, and infinitely cheaper than a human counterpart. These are the highly repetitive, rigidly scripted interactions that require 0 contextual empathy.
Those jobs simply evaporate.
They vanish.
Okay, so if this massive sword is hanging over a $40 billion industry, what are the actual companies in the Philippines doing about it?
Well, they aren't waiting around.
Right, these are massive multinational corporations with entire risk forecasting divisions. I have to assume they aren't just sitting in their Manila boardrooms hoping the AI trend blows over.
Definitely not. We are watching a desperate race against the machine happen in real time.
What does the data show they're doing?
We have a report from the Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas, the country's central bank. They surveyed the member firms of IBPP, the national industry trade body representing the BPO sector.
And what did they find?
The critical finding: 67% of those member firms have already integrated AI tools into their operations as of 2025.
Wait, 2/3 of the entire industry?
2/3.
In just a matter of a few years since ChatGPT and these large language models launched.
Over 2 out of 3 companies have moved from observation to actual implementation. They aren't waiting to see how the regulatory dust settles. They're actively cutting costs right now.
There is a quote from the source text that just stopped me in my tracks when I read it.
The one about capitalism.
Yeah. It says, "This is what happens when capitalism stops needing workers. It doesn't announce itself with marches in the street. It happens in an industry park outside Manila on a Tuesday when a software contract gets quietly signed in California."
It's chilling, but it's incredibly accurate.
There's no grand announcement, no factory whistleblowing for the last time.
Oh.
Just a vendor email, a digital signature on a cloud contract, and suddenly 1,000 jobs are obsolete.
It's the silent, invisible nature of digital displacement. That's what makes it so difficult for society to fully grasp until the damage is already done.
Right, because when a physical factory closes, the building sits empty, the parking lot rusts. There's a visual monument to the economic loss.
But when a digital process is automated, the workflow just shifts to a server in Nevada, and the local worker simply doesn't log in the next day.
But the Philippine government and the industry leaders on the ground, they aren't blind to this, are they?
No, they understand the existential threat perfectly, and they have initiated a massive coordinated response, which we can categorize as the upskilling bet.
Let's dig into that upskilling bet, because the Philippine Skills Framework is fascinating.
It's highly ambitious.
Their stated goal is to upskill 1 million workers by 2028. That is like a heroic, almost wartime mobilization level target.
They want to move these workers rapidly up the value chain, get them out of the basic script reading call center work, and train them for analytics, cybersecurity, AI supervision.
Basically, they're trying to run ahead of the automation wave.
It is the only logical macroeconomic strategy available to them. And ironically, on a pure balance sheet level, it might actually work to save the industry's aggregate revenue numbers.
But really, the industry revenue might go up.
If we look at the data, the Philippine BPO industry actually added jobs and revenue in 2024 and 2025. Global companies are still expanding their footprints there to handle complex operations, even as they automate the routine stuff.
So pie is still growing. For now.
For now, yes.
Okay, I can hear the but coming from a mile away. There is a massive structural flaw in that optimism, isn't there?
There is, and it requires us to take a very harsh, unromantic reality check regarding how labor markets actually function in the real world.
Let's break down the mechanics of that.
The statement, "The Philippine BPO industry survives and grows," and the statement, "The current BPO workers survive and prosper," are two completely independent and potentially contradictory propositions.
Okay, walk me through the life cycle of a typical worker in this scenario then.
Imagine an individual who has spent the last 10 years reading highly structured scripts to resolve basic billing disputes. Through automation, that specific job category is disappearing.
Right, the AI takes that over.
Simultaneously, thanks to this upskilling push, a new, higher-paying job opens up in the exact same office building. Say, a cloud infrastructure security analyst.
Okay.
The bitter, unavoidable truth of the labor market is that the person who is laid off from the low-end call center job is very rarely the same person who gets hired to do the high-end analytics work.
Because the gap in foundational knowledge is simply too wide.
It's an immense gap.
It's like, imagine you own a diner that has been serving basic burgers for 20 years.
Okay, I'm with you.
Suddenly, the neighborhood changes, the market demands high-end omakase sushi, and the demand for burgers drops to zero.
A total market shift.
Right. So you remodel a restaurant, you change the sign on the door to say sushi, but your fry cook doesn't magically become a master sushi chef overnight just because you launched a 2-week training program.
That analogy perfectly illustrates the friction of transition.
the cognitive requirements, the years of specialized technique, it's entirely different. So your fry cook is out of a job and you go hire a new, highly educated chef.
Exactly. Upskilling is frequently discussed by policymakers as this magic wand, a frictionless pipeline from obsolete work to the jobs of the future.
But it's not frictionless.
Not at all. Moving a worker from a purely dialogue-driven, scripted interaction to a role requiring complex data architecture requires a fundamental rewiring of their educational background.
You're asking someone to jump from a basic literacy to advanced mathematics.
And achieving that cognitive leap for 1 million individual adults in a 3-year window is practically impossible.
So even if the total number of jobs in the country stays the same or even grows, the actual people holding those jobs completely turn over.
The industry survives, but the original workforce becomes collateral damage. The original middle-class workers are still displaced, thrown back into an economy that has no use for their specific skill set.
Man, that's heavy. Now, we've been very heavily focused on the Philippines because they are the undisputed heavyweight champion of this industry.
Their exposure is certainly the most dramatic.
But I want to shift our focus for a second to prove that this isn't just some isolated geographic anomaly unique to Manila. The source material brings up Bangladesh as a sort of miniature high-speed version of this exact same crisis.
Bangladesh provides a perfect, highly illustrative parallel. Their domestic BPO sector is currently much smaller.
What are their numbers looking like?
It generates about $850 million in annual revenue and employs roughly 80,000 to 85,000 workers. The local trade body, BACO, represents over 400 member firms.
So they are essentially where the Philippines was a couple of decades ago.
Exactly.
And their ambitions are massive. I was reading their strategic goals, and they publicly set a target for 2030 to triple their employment in this sector.
To 300,000 workers.
Yeah, 300,000 workers and $5 billion in annual export revenue. They view this as their ticket to accelerated economic development.
They absolutely do. But what becomes fascinating and honestly deeply concerning when you analyze their trajectory through the lens of AI is the shared tragedy of their economic strategy.
They're running the exact same playbook, aren't they?
The exact same playbook the Philippines ran in the early 2000s. The government in Dhaka is building the infrastructure, training the workforce in English, offering tax incentives.
They are facing the exact same structural risk of AI displacement. They're just starting the race from a different line on the track.
They're trying to sprint toward an economic finish line that artificial intelligence is actively erasing while they run.
That is the cruel irony of their situation.
It is. Their 2030 ambitions rely on a fundamental, unstated assumption that the cost pressure curve of artificial intelligence won't break the foundational logic of their entire industry first.
Because their primary competitive advantage is extreme labor arbitrage, right? They offer human labor at a lower cost than almost anyone else.
But if an AI agent costs 10 cents an hour to operate by 2028 and processes information 1,000 times faster than a human, it doesn't matter how inexpensive human labor in Dhaka is.
The math just stops working.
They mathematically cannot compete with a digital machine that requires no sleep, no health insurance, no office space, and no management hierarchy.
They are essentially hoping to outrun a technological bullet.
It's heartbreaking when you think about the human capital being poured into a strategy that might be obsolete before it even matures.
So if this technological sword is hanging over Manila, and the exact same sword is hanging over Dhaka, where else is it hanging?
Everywhere, routine cognitive work is happening.
Which transitions us perfectly into zooming out and looking at the macro disruption. Because if this work is dying in the developing world, what the heck is happening globally to the rest of the labor market?
To understand the global shockwaves, we really need to turn to the World Economic Forum's Future of Jobs Report 2025.
Published just this past January, right?
Yes. It represents one of the most comprehensive attempts to map this global transition, and the headline numbers they project for the end of the decade are staggering.
Hit me with the numbers.
They forecast that 92 million jobs globally will be entirely displaced by 2030 due to technological integration.
92 million lost.
However, they simultaneously project that 170 million new jobs will be created, driven by the new demands of a digitized, AI-integrated economy.
Wait, hang on. Look at those WEF numbers for a second. 170 million new jobs created, minus 92 million jobs lost.
Doing the math.
Yeah, by my basic math, that is a net gain of 78 million jobs worldwide. If I'm a global economist looking at those top-line numbers, I'm popping champagne right now.
It certainly sounds like a golden age of employment on the surface.
Right. That sounds like great news. Why on earth are we framing this as a looming crisis if the global economy is going to be up by 78 million jobs?
Because you always have to read the footnotes in macroeconomic reports. And the footnotes here contain a terrifying reality regarding the friction of that transition.
It goes right back to that diner analogy, doesn't it?
Exactly. The crisis isn't about the absolute number of jobs available. It's about who is qualified to get those new jobs and what profound cognitive shifts those new jobs demand.
What do the footnotes say?
The WEF report explicitly states that 22% of all current jobs globally will be structurally transformed. Furthermore, they estimate that approximately 39% of the skills currently utilized by the global workforce will become entirely obsolete in just 5 years.
Oh, wow. Let that sink in if you're listening. Almost 40% of what people know how to do today, the skills they went to college for, the processes they've mastered over decades, will be completely useless to the market.
Completely obsolete. So yes, there's a projected net gain in the absolute number of jobs, but the transitional friction,
the massive gaping canyon between the skills the current workforce possesses today and what those new 170 million jobs will demand.
it's a chasm. And millions of workers, particularly those in routine cognitive roles, are going to fall into that chasm and lack the resources to climb out.
Let's bring this closer to home for a lot of our listeners who might be sitting in North America or Europe right now. Let's look at the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics.
Their 2024 to 2034 employment projections.
Yeah, we are looking at the white-collar shift here, and the numbers are incredibly stark. Over the next 10 years, cashiers are projected to lose 314,000 jobs.
The single largest occupational decline in their entire forecast.
Bank tellers are projected to decline by 13%. Customer service reps down 5%.
And we must ask the critical analytical question. What do all of those declining, seemingly disparate professions have in common?
They are entirely defined by routine, repetitive, heavily dialogue-driven work.
Exactly. Taking a standardized order, processing a standard financial transaction, answering a frequently asked question from a list of 30 possible answers.
Which is the exact domain of work that generative AI now executes adequately, infinitely patiently, and unbelievably cheaply.
But, we were discussing this in the prep for the show.
Oh, yeah, my skepticism. I have to admit, I played devil's advocate a bit.
You did, and it's a fair point to raise.
Because we've lived through automation panics before. It seems like every 10 years there's a new cover story about robots taking all the jobs.
Like the famous 2013 Oxford study.
Yes, by economists Frey and Osborne. They claimed 47% of U.S. jobs were at high risk of automation. The media went wild, everybody freaked out.
It was the defining document of the early 2010s automation panic, and that 47% number was hotly debated across academia. A subsequent, more conservative study by Mannheim University put the figure of at-risk jobs at just 9%.
A huge difference.
And later, a comprehensive 2022 retrospective analysis by the Information Technology and Innovation Foundation essentially found that the robot apocalypse predicted in 2013 simply didn't materialize.
The unemployment rate didn't skyrocket. The jobs didn't vanish the way the doomsayers predicted.
Right.
So, playing devil's advocate again. If the experts were demonstrably wrong in 2013, why aren't they wrong today in 2025? Why should we believe the panic this time around?
That is perhaps the most important question to ask, and understanding the answer is really the aha moment of this entire discussion.
What's the difference?
The fundamental disagreement among economists over the last decade wasn't really a debate about whether routine cognitive work could eventually be automated. It was a debate about how fast the underlying technology would mature.
And how broadly it could be applied.
Right. What makes this specific moment in history fundamentally different is the advent and rapid maturation of generative AI.
These massive large language models.
Yes, models that can reason, contextualize, understand nuance, and converse fluently. It's an entirely different beast.
It's not just a robotic arm painting a car door the exact same way 10,000 times on an assembly line anymore.
The paradigm has completely shifted. The last major wave of automation primarily came for physical, repetitive labor, the blue-collar work on the factory floor.
And then the software algorithms of the 2010s came for highly structured numerical data processing, like basic accounting,
But generative AI has essentially reopened the automation question entirely because it is coming directly for the white-collar, dialogue-driven professions that felt entirely insulated during the last wave.
Because it mimics human synthesis.
It mimics the appearance of empathy. It mimics complex problem-solving and creative generation.
It's coming for the people who thought their 4-year college degree in communications or business admin was an impenetrable magical shield against automation.
That illusion of white-collar safety has evaporated. If your daily job involves sitting at a desk, looking at disparate pieces of information on a screen, making a minor rule-based decision, and then typing an email to summarize that decision,
You are squarely in the crosshairs.
you absolutely are.
So if we accept that this massive shift is happening, we really have to follow the money. Because if all of this routine cognitive work is being displaced and machines are doing it infinitely faster and cheaper, an immense amount of wealth is being generated by that sudden explosion in efficiency.
Immense wealth.
But the most dangerous question of this whole scenario is, when an algorithm does the work of 10 people, where does the salary of those 10 people actually go?
Who gets to keep that money?
Exactly.
Right.
Which leads us into what I think is the most alarming part of our analysis, the cruel math of the AI economy.
Cruel math is an incredibly apt way to describe the underlying mechanics of this transition.
To understand the scale of wealth we're discussing, let's look at the projections from PwC's exhaustive Sizing the Prize report.
They project that artificial intelligence could add a staggering $15.7 trillion to the global gross domestic product by the year 2030.
$15.7 trillion.
Of pure technology-driven economic expansion.
That is a number so large, it is almost incomprehensible. By all traditional metrics, that should trigger a global golden age of wealth creation.
In theory, yes.
That should lift millions out of poverty, fund public infrastructure, build schools everywhere.
It is a massive expansion of global wealth. But we must strictly distinguish between wealth creation and wealth distribution. They're entirely separate economic mechanisms.
And how is it being distributed?
When you break down the PwC data to see who actually captures that $15.7 trillion, the structural inequality of the AI revolution becomes breathtaking.
Let's hear the regional breakdown.
According to their forecasts, China is projected to capture 26% of that total GDP boost. North America is projected to capture 14.5%.
Wait, let me make sure I'm following the math on the global distribution. If you look at the total economic impact.
Let me clarify the specific regional concentration. Combined, those two specific regions, North America and China, will account for roughly 70% of the total global economic impact of AI.
70%.
That is $10.7 trillion of new wealth consolidating into just two geographical and political spheres.
Nearly 3/4 of the entire global economic benefit is going to just two regions. And what about the rest of the world?
The developing regions.
Yeah, the regions that are actively losing their BPO industries to this technology.
The projections for the rest of the world are grim. Developing regions like Latin America and the entirety of the African continent, they are projected to capture less than 6% combined.
Okay, that right there is the chilling core of this entire situation. The countries doing the work that is actively being automated, the Philippines, Bangladesh, Colombia, South Africa, are not the countries collecting the massive productivity gains and financial rewards.
The wealth is being aggressively extracted from the developing world and beamed directly into server farms in Silicon Valley and Shenzhen.
It represents one of the largest, fastest structural wealth transfers in human history.
And it is vital that we understand why this happens. It's not a coincidence, and it's not simply because North American companies are better at business.
It is a deeply entrenched structural oligopoly.
Yes, we have to examine what we can call the AI monopoly. And the Stanford 2025 AI Index lays the architecture of this monopoly bare for anyone willing to read the data.
Walk us through the architecture. What makes it a monopoly?
To understand the monopoly, you have to look at who is actually building the foundation models. Foundation models are the massive, immensely complex AI engines like GPT-4 or Gemini that power virtually all the other downstream AI applications.
And where are they being built?
In 2024, U.S.-based institutions produced 40 notable cutting-edge foundation AI models. China produced 15.
Okay.
The entirety of the European Union, they produced 3. And all 3 of those happen to be from France.
40 from the U.S., 15 from China, 3 from Europe, and the entire rest of the world combined.
0.
0.
The barrier to entry for creating these models is simply too high, and the private investment gap driving this concentration is even starker.
What are the investment numbers?
Private AI investment in the U.S. hit $109.1 billion in 2024. To put that in perspective, that is nearly 12 times what China invested in the private sector and an astounding 24 times what the UK invested.
44 times.
By the end of 2025, out of the $202 billion invested globally in AI companies, U.S. firms absorbed roughly $159 billion of it.
That's 79% of all global AI investment going to a single country. It operates like a financial black hole.
The gravity is immense.
Right, like if you have a brilliant AI startup in Berlin or Sao Paulo or Manila, the necessary capital inevitably pulls you, your talent, and your intellectual property straight to the United States.
Exactly. The software and capital concentration is extreme. But the situation gets even tighter and the monopoly becomes even more unbreakable when you look below the software level.
Down to the actual physical atoms required to make this technology function.
Yes. We have to talk about the hardware choke point, because artificial intelligence doesn't run on magic, and it doesn't float in an ethereal cloud. It runs on physical semiconductors. It runs on intensely complex silicon chips.
The massive data centers.
Yeah.
We really need to talk about the U.S. International Trade Commission analysis on this, because when I read this section, my jaw literally hit the floor.
It's astounding data.
I thought the software concentration was bad. The hardware concentration is a true textbook oligopoly.
It absolutely is. And it is governed by the strict laws of physics and immense capital requirements. The ITC analysis shows that just 4 Asian economies, Taiwan, South Korea, China, and Japan, account for over 70% of all the value created in global semiconductor manufacturing.
And within that incredibly exclusive group, Taiwan is the undisputed king.
Unassailable. Taiwan alone holds roughly 46% of the world's total global foundry capacity.
For our listeners who aren't hardware engineers, a foundry is the actual physical factory that prints the microscopic circuits onto the silicon chips, right?
Correct. It is the ultra-advanced multi-billion-dollar facility that turns raw silicon wafers into the sophisticated processors that run AI models.
And not only do they control 46% of total capacity.
When you look at the bleeding edge of technology, they produce over 90% of the world's most advanced chips.
90%?
Over 90%. These are the specific, hyper-efficient processors that the massive AI foundation models require to train and operate.
So let's follow the logic here. If Taiwan were to suddenly go offline due to an earthquake, a geopolitical conflict, or some supply chain collapse, the entire global AI revolution essentially grinds to a halt by Tuesday.
The entire ecosystem would be paralyzed almost instantly. And when you add the United States to that power dynamic...
Because U.S. companies like NVIDIA and AMD completely dominate the design architecture, even if they don't manufacture them.
Right. This tiny 5-country grouping captures the overwhelming, almost absolute majority of design plus manufacturing capability on Earth.
Let's make this incredibly concrete for the listener. Think of this dynamic like an ultra-exclusive VIP club.
Okay, the VIP guest list.
Right. If you are a country, say you are Brazil or Nigeria or the Philippines, and you are not already on this 5-country guest list of chip design and manufacturing, you do not get to catch up.
You're locked out.
The barrier to entry isn't just high, it is physically and economically insurmountable. You can't just throw $1 trillion at the problem and decide to build a cutting-edge semiconductor foundry tomorrow.
You absolutely cannot. Building a cutting-edge foundry requires tens of billions of dollars in upfront capital alone.
And the specialized equipment.
It requires extreme ultraviolet lithography machines from ASML in the Netherlands, which themselves cost hundreds of millions of dollars and require multiple 747s just to ship.
That's insane.
It requires vibration-free concrete foundations. But most importantly, it requires decades of localized institutional knowledge, thousands of PhDs who have spent 20 years perfecting the microscopic chemical etching processes required to print transistors the size of a virus.
You cannot buy that institutional knowledge overnight.
No. So if you aren't on the guest list, you just get to be a perpetual customer.
You get to buy the finished technology from the countries that hold all the cards.
You become perpetually technologically dependent. You are locked into an endless cycle of paying rent in the form of software licenses and cloud computing fees, just to access the basic tools required to keep your domestic economy functioning.
Which brings us to a historical parallel that, frankly, just makes my stomach drop.
The Detroit Warning.
Yeah. We've clearly established this massive macroeconomic shift. The routine cognitive work is disappearing from the developing world, and the immense wealth is concentrating in the U.S. and China.
But what is the actual on-the-ground human cost of that specific dynamic?
Exactly. What happens when an entire region's economic purpose is hollowed out?
Yeah.
And the terrifying thing is, We don't have to guess. We actually have a precedent for this.
We've seen this exact movie before.
Let's talk about the Detroit warning.
It is the most potent, heavily documented historical analogy we have for understanding the societal trauma of rapid economic displacement.
Set the scene for us.
If we look at the collapse of U.S. manufacturing, specifically between the years 1980 and 2010, the United States lost approximately 7.5 million manufacturing jobs.
7.5 million.
And the speed of the decline in the latter half of that period was staggering. About 5.7 million of those jobs evaporated just between 2000 and 2010.
A single decade of absolute structural decimation.
And no region felt this pain more acutely than the American Rust Belt, with Detroit serving as the epicenter. Detroit alone shed 150,000 auto industry jobs between 2000 and 2008.
We saw a very similar devastating story play out in Cleveland, with the sudden collapse of the steel industry over roughly the same period.
Yes, the parallels are striking.
I want to spend a minute connecting the mechanics of this for the listener, because the parallel is haunting. Think about what a factory essentially is.
It's a localized geographic hub where you process inputs into outputs.
Exactly. Detroit was built entirely around the physical assembly line. Raw materials like steel and rubber come in, the workers apply their labor, and finished cars go out.
And the Philippines today is built around the exact same concept, but it's a digital assembly line.
Right. Raw, unstructured data comes in. The workers apply their cognitive labor and resolve customer service tickets, structured data sets, and process claims go out.
Detroit lost the physical assembly line to overseas automation and globalization. Today, the Philippines is losing the digital assembly line to artificial intelligence.
That is such an exceptionally accurate structural comparison. The inputs and outputs have shifted from physical to digital, but the economic vulnerability is identical.
But what we need to focus our analysis on is what happens sociologically after the jobs leave.
The human toll.
Because what followed the factory closures in the American Rust Belt wasn't simply a localized spike in the unemployment rate that eventually smoothed out. It was a fundamental generational unraveling of society itself.
The invisible casualties of efficiency?
Yes. To understand this, I want to bring in some vital research from the Brookings Institution, which built upon the groundbreaking epidemiological work of economists Ann Case and Angus Deaton.
Through their research into American mortality rates, right?
Exactly. They documented a terrifying phenomenon that they famously categorized as deaths of despair.
That is a remarkably bleak, heavy phrase. Deaths of despair. What exactly does that encompass in a public health context?
The term refers specifically to three interconnected causes of mortality: suicides, drug overdoses, particularly driven by the opioid epidemic, and alcohol-related liver diseases.
And Case and Deaton mapped where these were happening.
Yes, they analyzed the data and found that these specific types of deaths were hyper-concentrated in the exact geographic regions where those steady, middle-class manufacturing jobs had rapidly disappeared.
Wow.
The loss of stable, dignified, unionized work didn't just hurt local bank accounts, it shattered the psychological foundation of entire communities. It removed the organizing principle of daily life.
Because it's not just about the paycheck. When the factory leaves, it takes the pride with it. It takes the identity of being a provider.
And the ripple effects are catastrophic.
Right, because when the factory closes, the local diner across the street loses its lunch rush and boards up its windows. The property values plummet, which means the local tax base dries up.
The school funding drops, the quality of education craters, the sense of communal future is erased.
Do we have the overall stats on that?
I want you to consider a statistic from the source text that perfectly illustrates the severity of this collapse. Between 2006 and 2015 alone, over 1 million Americans died of these deaths of despair.
Over 1 million.
The numbers were so staggering that the United States achieved a deeply tragic milestone. It became the only wealthy, industrialized nation in the entire world where overall life expectancy actually declined.
1 million people. That is the casualty rate of a major war.
But it was a silent war waged by rapid economic displacement and societal neglect.
It is a devastating metric. It's hard to even wrap your head around 1 million preventable deaths linked directly to the loss of economic purpose.
And this brings us to the core lesson of the Detroit warning.
The lesson here isn't a Luddite argument. It isn't that automation is inherently evil or that technological efficiency is a sin. Progress happens. Humanity moves forward.
But the lesson is that when the work vanishes faster than a community can adapt, the consequences metastasize far, far beyond the labor market.
It acts like a sociological cancer within the community.
When the primary economic engine of a town stops, The marriages break down under the crushing weight of financial stress and lost identity. The civic institutions fail because the funding and the community trust evaporate.
Public health systems collapse because people lose their employer-sponsored insurance and turn to cheap, highly addictive self-medication to cope with the psychological pain.
The very fabric of the society tears apart.
So to bring this full circle back to our central thesis, we know that the Philippines in 2025 is not Detroit in 1985.
No, the cultures are vastly different. The social safety nets operate differently.
But the shape of what is possible, the rapid structural hollowing out of a massive stabilizing middle class, is exactly identical.
Exactly identical.
If 1.9 million BPO workers in the Philippines lose their primary source of income over a rapid 5-year span, the ripple effects through the Philippine domestic economy will be catastrophic.
You will see those gleaming high-rises sit empty. You will see a massive collapse in retail and domestic consumption. You'll see a spike in poverty.
You will see, well, despair.
That is the terrifying potential outcome if the transition is left entirely to the whims of the free market without massive coordinated intervention.
But as we move into the final phase of our analysis, we have to ask a crucial question. Is it all doom? Is the collapse inevitable?
Because the data does actually point to a way out, an evolutionary path forward for the workforce.
However, that same data also reveals a massive hidden structural barrier that is currently preventing most of the world from walking that path. Let's look at the connectivity chasm and what economic hope actually looks like in the age of AI.
I am so glad we are pivoting here because we cannot leave everyone listening to this in a state of total despair. There's a silver lining, a way to survive and thrive.
I want to bring in this incredible 2024 academic analysis we have in the stack. Researchers looked at a massive data set, 12 million individual U.S. job postings spanning from 2018 to 2023.
And they found something totally counterintuitive regarding what employers are actually looking for in the AI era.
They identified what economists are calling the human premium.
The human premium.
Walk us through that, because it sounds like the exact opposite of robots replacing us.
They found that AI-focused roles jobs where the employee is explicitly required to work alongside or manage artificial intelligence were nearly twice as likely to require distinctly, inherently human skills compared to non-AI roles.
We are talking about skills like emotional resilience, cognitive agility, complex real-world problem solving, and nuanced analytical thinking.
This finding brilliantly validates our earlier discussion regarding the economic concept of complement versus substitute. Let's look at a practical example.
Okay, lay it on us.
A generative AI model can instantly write 1,000 lines of functional code or generate 100 different variations of a marketing email in about 3 seconds. The machine has infinite generative capacity.
But the machine does not have judgment.
Exactly. It takes a human being, equipped with complex critical thinking skills, to look at those 100 variations, understand the nuanced cultural context of the target demographic, understand the current geopolitical sensitivities, and select the single right email to send.
The workers who learn to direct the AI, to audit its outputs for bias or error, and to seamlessly integrate those outputs into complex, messy, real-world human workflows, those specific workers become immensely, almost unimaginably valuable.
They capture the human premium.
Okay, so let me synthesize this. If the human premium is real, then the solution to the whole crisis is actually quite simple.
Simple in theory, yes.
We just need to teach everyone to direct the machine. We execute a massive global upskilling program. We give the call center worker in Manila and the data entry clerk in Dhaka access to ChatGPT.
We teach them prompt engineering. We teach them how to audit neural networks.
And boom, they transition from being a substitute to being a highly paid AI auditor. We save the middle class. Problem solved.
It is a beautiful, deeply appealing, technologically optimistic vision. And it is the vision championed by almost every major tech CEO in Silicon Valley. But unfortunately, when you apply that vision to the actual developing world, it runs face first into an immovable brick wall of global infrastructure.
That optimism relies entirely on a fundamental, unstated assumption, the assumption of universal access.
And access is the one part of this macroeconomic equation that the global community is completely failing to solve.
Okay, hit me with the reality check. What are the optimists missing?
To understand the barrier, we need to look at the International Telecommunication Union's Facts and Figures 2025 report. The ITU is the United Nations Specialized Agency for Information and Communication Technologies.
What does their data reveal?
Their data reveals the fatal flaw in the utopian vision of universal upskilling. The reality is this. Right now, today, as we are having this conversation about advanced neural networks, 2.2 billion people remain completely, entirely offline.
2.2 billion. Let that number land. That is roughly a quarter of the entire human population that has never sent an email, let alone queried a large language model.
A full quarter of humanity has no internet access whatsoever. They exist entirely outside the digital economy, and the divide is starkly, brutally economic.
Break down the divide for us.
In high-income countries where the AI models are being built and deployed, internet penetration sits at roughly 94%.
For listeners in those countries, the internet is like oxygen. It's an invisible utility that surrounds everything you do.
But when you look at low-income countries, internet penetration plummets to just 23%.
So almost 80% of the population in low-income nations cannot even approach the starting line of the AI revolution.
They are entirely disconnected from the very tools required to learn the skills necessary to survive the transition.
And we know exactly how critical this infrastructure is to basic human development.
We have the data to prove it.
Yeah, World Bank research has robustly, repeatedly documented that a mere 10 percentage point increase in fixed broadband penetration within a developing economy is directly associated with a 1.38 percentage point boost in their overall GDP growth.
A 1.38% boost to national GDP just from laying fiber optic cable. That is a massive return on investment.
It proves that connectivity isn't a luxury. It's the fundamental prerequisite for participating in global trade.
It is the absolute bedrock. The connection between basic digital connectivity and economic mobility is one of the most undeniable, rock-solid findings in modern development economics. You simply cannot participate in, let alone thrive in, the modern global economy without a high-speed connection to it.
So here is the ultimate heartbreaking tragedy of that dynamic. If the AI economy, this $15.7 trillion bonanza that PwC is projecting, is being built entirely on top of the internet,
right,
and a quarter of humanity isn't even on the internet, then that 25% of the world is completely fundamentally locked out.
They don't even get to play the game.
They are disqualified before the whistle blows. We talk about technology closing the digital divide, but AI isn't closing it at all. AI is taking the digital divide, pouring concrete over it, and turning it into an impenetrable digital wall.
That is exactly the dynamic we are witnessing. Artificial intelligence essentially operates as a massive macroeconomic multiplier.
Multiplies whatever you already have.
Yes. If you already possess the education, the capital, and the high-speed connectivity, AI multiplies your productivity and your wealth exponentially.
But if you lack any of those three foundational elements,
AI simply multiplies your disadvantage. It actively works against you by automating whatever meager routine cognitive work you are relying on to climb the first rung of the economic ladder.
Man. Okay, this has been an incredibly heavy, profoundly important deep dive. We've covered a massive amount of conceptual ground today.
We really have.
As we wrap up and try to synthesize this journey, let's look at the big picture we've painted. We started our journey in the Philippines, looking at an entire national economy, a $40 billion industry employing 1.9 million people that built its middle class on routine cognitive work.
And suddenly they were facing an 89% exposure risk to rapid automation.
We established clearly that the Philippines is the canary in the macroeconomic coal mine.
Because of their extreme concentration in the BPO sector, they are simply the first to truly, acutely feel the systemic pressure of this new technology on a national scale.
Right. The canary is coughing. And as we explored, Bangladesh is the next canary in line, desperately trying to build an industry that is simultaneously being dismantled by software.
And after them, the ripple effect spread outward.
It comes for every single economy on Earth, including the United States and Europe, that built large segments of its middle class on routine cognitive work.
We're talking about the armies of data entry clerks, paralegal assistants, junior coders, basic accountants, insurance claims processors.
It fundamentally does not matter where you live on the map. If your daily job involves acting like a human router for information taking data from point A, formatting it, and sending it to point B, the machine is coming for that task.
And our final thesis, synthesizing all these disparate sources, from the IMF working paper to the WEF employment projections to the Stanford AI Index, is this. The real question we, as a global society, should be asking isn't if artificial intelligence will be transformative.
That debate is entirely over. The technology has arrived. It already is transformative.
The only question that matters now is what we choose to do with the spoils of this revolution.
That is the crux of it all. Will the immense, unprecedented wealth generated by AI, that $15.7 trillion of pure economic expansion, be taxed and utilized to rebuild the communities it inevitably displaces?
Will we fund the massive retraining programs, the social safety nets, and the global broadband infrastructure required to bring everyone along?
Or will we allow that wealth to simply concentrate at the very, very top of the global food chain, flowing entirely into a handful of tech hubs and semiconductor foundries in North America and China, exactly like every other wave of automation before it?
That is undoubtedly the defining geopolitical, economic, and moral question of the 2020s and 2030s. And the terrifying part is that we don't have to wait decades to read the history books for the answer.
We have a country right now running the experiment in real time.
The Philippines is our 5-year preview. What happens to their middle class over the next 60 months will eventually happen everywhere.
It is terrifying, it is deeply fascinating, and it is absolutely vital to watch and understand. And I want to leave you, our listener, with a final thought to mull over as you go about the rest of your day.
A little self-audit.
Yeah. We talked a lot about the economic concepts of complement versus substitute today. We explored the difference between the people who are seamlessly replaced by the machine versus the people who learn to direct the machine and capture the human premium.
So take a look at your own day-to-day life. Look at the specific tasks you perform at your desk every single day.
If you were an entire economy, what percentage of your daily routine is essentially call center work routine, repetitive data processing, just waiting to be automated by a slightly smarter algorithm?
And what percentage of your day relies on the uniquely human resilience, creativity, and analytical agility required to actually direct the machine?
It is a crucial, potentially career-saving self-audit that everyone needs to perform. Ask yourself honestly, in the next 5 years, when the software contract gets quietly signed on a Tuesday, are you the worker being replaced, or are you the one learning to give the orders?
Something to really think about.
Thank you so much for joining us in this deep dive. It's been an incredible, eye-opening journey through the data, and we will see you next time.